listening to the Pulpit Fiction Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Pulpit Fiction Podcast, a lectionary podcast for preachers, seekers, and Bible geeks. This is episode 646 for Sunday, November 16th, 2025, proper 28, ordinary time 33, the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost here in year C. Woo! That's a lot. For this show, we are going to jump in with Luke chapter 21, verses 5 through 19, the signs of the times. Then we'll jump back to the Hebrew Bible with Isaiah 65, 17 through 25, creating a new heaven and new earth. And we'll close out with 2 Thessalonians, discipline for the undisciplined, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 6 through 13. I'm Eric Fistler, United Church of Christ pastor, out here in the shining shores of Crystal Lake, Illinois. And with me, as always, the marvelous Methodist in Rock Island, Illinois, it's Robb McCoy. Robb, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Excited to get back into it. We had a great week last week, spending time in Asheville, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with a bunch of South Carolinian pastors from the ELCA. Their convocation, they asked us to be two of the three keynote speakers. It was an incredible time, a beautiful place there in Luther Ridge, in Asheville, North Carolina, and got to meet Starlet Thomas, the other keynote, which was fantastic. And then, I mean, more people than we can sit here and name. Just a lot of just great people. I think Shannon Mullen, who sort of instigated us being there, but there were so many others. It was such a great experience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and big shout out to so many of the folks that we met there, and so many just great pastors. I think it's always important and good to be with other pastors and hear the hard and difficult and good work that our colleagues are doing around the United States and really around the world too. So it's just good. It was good to be with them, good to worship together. It's amazing. It always surprised me, Robb, how rare it is for pastors often to just attend worship, just to be in worship, not lead worship, not to be preaching, but just to be there. And so that was a really wonderful gift. So huge shout out to, again, that ELCA South Carolina Synod. So good to be with you all. And shout out to Reverend Dr. Starletta Thomas too. It's good to hear her good words as well. So yeah, it was fun to be there. It's also why we didn't have a live show last week, but we are very happy to be back and have a live show this week and be back with y'all, which is good. Be back in our studios. It was fun to be together, Robb, too. It's a funny thing, too, where we got to hear each other preach a bit. And that was kind of fun because we don't get to do that.
No, I know. I feel like one of us was asked, like, it's a nice, something about like, you must have heard each other a lot before. I'm like, well, yeah. We hear each other a lot talking. I very seldom, I think we could count on one hand how many times we've heard each other preach, because we're typically doing something when the other one is. And so, yeah, no, that was a special treat too, just to have that time with you in particular. So yeah. And there were some really beautiful, just worshipful moments and just time away. Mm-hmm. Right. Just being able to walk through the woods and sit up at that lookout point, the incredible work that Asheville's done. It was a reminder of the scars of the hurricane that Helene are still there, and yet so much healing as well, and hearing stories of the resilience there, just being in that place was inspiring. So yeah, it was just a fantastic week.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons.
It was a lot of fun. It was good, but it's good to be back with everybody. Kind of good to get back into the rhythm. So let's get into the rhythm now with our gospel. The rhythm is going to get you.
Very few comparatively know what is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Good news, everyone.
All right. Well, the good news this week comes from Luke 21. It's verses 5 through 19. This is the Common English Bible. Some people were talking about the temple, how it was decorated with beautiful stones and ornaments dedicated to God. Jesus said, "As for the things you are admiring, the time is coming when not even one stone will be left on another. All will be demolished." They asked him, "Teacher, when will these things happen? What sign will show that these things are about to happen?" Jesus said, "Watch out that you aren't deceived. Many will come in my name saying, 'I am the one,' and 'It's time.' Don't follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. These things must happen first, but the end won't happen immediately." Then Jesus said to them, "Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other. There will be great earthquakes and wide-scale food shortages and epidemics. There will also be terrifying sights and great signs in the sky. But before all this occurs, they will take you into custody and harass you because of your faith. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will provide you with the opportunity to testify. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. I'll give you the words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to counter or contradict. You will be betrayed by your parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends. They will execute some of you. Everyone will hate you because of my name. Still, not a hair on your heads will be lost. By holding fast, you will gain your lives."
All right. It feels like Advent. Like this is like, because I haven't looked ahead, but like first week of Advent is usually a little apocalypse. And here we are on the eve of the penultimate Sunday of ordinary time. So I think we're going to have this, and then we'll have Christ the King, and then we'll have another little apocalypse. So I think that's something to prepare for. And to talk about apocalyptic literature and what that means and what when it pops up and what sparks apocalyptic literature. And I was thinking about our, before we get too much into the nitty gritty of this passage, how I was heard an interview between Conan O'Brien and the creator of Family Guy. And I'm not a big Family Guy guy. He also created Seth MacFarlane. That's it. The Orville. And they were talking about the need for stories that uplift. Because I feel like, apocalypses come in times of despair, in times of, persecution, and times of upheaval. And you think about how many movies these days are dystopian futures. Right. Yeah. And I feel like the dystopian future genre of sci-fi is very similar to apocalyptic literature. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not like drawing out this as a scholarly paper, but I feel like there's something there that like they come up at about the same times. They deal in the worlds of like black and white, good versus evil. Like, I don't know. There's just so much. I think there's some connections there. And our lack of sci-fi movies that show a pathway to hope, right? Instead, we have all these sci-fi movies that are like, it's all falling apart. And that's what this is, right? This is this Luke's apocalypse, taking source from Mark 13, Mark's apocalypse. A lot of this comes almost word from there. Comes from this time of upheaval, the time of specifically the destruction of the temple. And this is not to say that Jesus isn't talking sci-fi, but I don't know. I just feel like there's a connection there with that moment and with what we're dealing with now in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to bust out the sci-fi nerddom, right, you're getting into a Star Trek, Star Wars debate, right? So, right. I mean, this is the massive difference. Not a debate, but it's Star Wars tells the story of a dystopian, horrific future, right? Or past, because it was a long time ago, right? But whatever.
And far, far away.
Yeah. Whereas Star Trek, I mean, somebody asked me the other day, they said, Eric, you're a giant nerd and you love all these different universes, right? Whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or Star Trek or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter and all, what's your favorite? And I said, my favorite by far is Star Trek. Because, and I think it also fits in this narrative too, which is Star Trek has an optimistic view of the future.
Right.
Right, that the entire basis, and yet is very clear on the horrors of the past. So basically it looks back and it was like, listen, things were rough now, right? It'll say like the late 20th century, early 21st century. Whether you're looking at I'm talking classic Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Star Trek, Rick Berman years. Right. So you talk about that. But then it says, and then it got worse, way worse. And then it got better. And that's how we get to this kind of not utopian, but almost utopian-esque future that we look at, that's beautiful and optimistic and hopeful and still struggles with
scarcity and yeah.
Right. And so, you don't have greed, you don't have scarcity, you don't have a lot of those things. So, but I do think it's that piece. And I think both of them speak to this, which is and we're going to see this also in the Isaiah passage, but you have this apocalyptic piece, right? Which is interesting, right? This revelation. That's what apocalyptic means, to be revealed. And it's weird too, Rob, because, right, when is this being written? Most likely written after the destruction of the temple, right? And I think as I was reading it this time, the thing that stood out is I think it's hard to understand this passage outside of the context of the horror and trauma of the exile, which was the last time that all these bad things happened, right? The last time that the temple was destroyed and not one stone stood on top of the others. Why did that happen? It happened because God willed it, right? It was God's displeasure. It was God's anger and wrath and correction to the Israelites ignoring the basic tenements of being the people of God, caring for the widow, caring for the orphan, welcoming the stranger, doing those pieces that we hear in First Isaiah and Amos and Hosea and all those things, right? And so it was almost the Babylonians become an instrument of God's wrath, and we have this destruction of the temple that comes out of it. And so there's an interesting piece here where Jesus is changing this piece, right? It's Patrick Oden talks about this. It says, by telling Jesus' prophecy of the destruction and razing of the temple, Luke offers a radical reinterpretation of this event. The destruction was not evidence of God's rejection and disfavor. Rather, it is the fulfillment of God's plan. Hence, rather than anxiety, Luke argues, this disaster should instill expectations and hope. What might bring terror should result instead in trust. Jesus said these things are going to happen. Therefore, though it appears as if God's plan and work has been undermined, this isn't so. Despite the seeming signs of disaster, God is still in charge. God is faithful. And so the people thus must remain faithful to God. And I think that that's the other piece too, right? Whether you're talking about, to bring it back to your connection with any sci-fi, whether you're talking about Star Trek or Star Wars or things like that, or a lot of those things, there's typically a principle that you call back to and say, listen, everything's falling apart, right? Zombie apocalypse, whether you're talking The Walking Dead or something like that. But there are certain things that we are going to hold to, certain core values, certain pieces of who we are. And I think that's the interesting piece here too, that this is not an unexpected doom that's coming, and it's not the displeasure and wrath of God that's coming, but rather these things are going to happen. And the worst of the worst that can happen is not an excuse to think God has abandoned you, or an excuse to stop being faithful to God.
Yeah. In fact, the signs that this stuff is happening is actually a sign that God is with you, right? I mean, it's flipping that script, and that's how this is different. Is we're talking about apocalyptic literature, like sci-fi, being about the future. This is really, it's written about the past in a sense. It's reframing Jesus saying that all this bad stuff that's going to happen, it's okay,
right.
And I've said many times, the destruction of the temple is the event that is in all the gospels without being in the gospels, right? It shapes everything about the story, and you could argue even the fact that they are written, after that, the reason, the destruction of the temple was such a huge event, such a traumatic event for the people. Seeing this as helping through that trauma, I think, is an important piece as well. There's an interesting literary context that's happening here too that we lose with the lectionary edit, right? By starting with verse 5, I think because the beginning of the chapter, I think, is important, right? Looking up, Jesus saw rich people throwing their gifts to the collection box for the temple ministry, or the temple treasury. He saw a poor widow throwing 2 small copper coins worth a penny. I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than them all. All of them are giving out of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she has to live. Right? This is the framing of this event. And what, like you said, the exile, like all of the prophets are written to explain why the exile happened. And it's basically God was in charge the whole time. We messed up. We stopped taking care of the widows and the orphans, and we stopped worshiping God. And that's why the exile happened. This is another sort of framing of this temple destruction happened because it's set up to rob the widow, right?
No.
Jesus had just talked about the temple tax. He just talked about give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. They're trying to trap him over and over again. And he just at the end of chapter 20, watch out for the legal experts. They like to walk around in long robes. They're the ones who cheat widows out of their homes and show off as they say long prayers. Then he points to a widow who maybe not has been cheated out of her home, but is still in hopeless poverty, paying money into the system. And now he's going to talk. And then they look out and they say, wow, Jesus, isn't this great? It's the Gilded Age. There's this facade of grandeur and godliness and isn't it awesome and wonderful? Because look what Herod did. He made us great again by building this incredible palace, this incredible ballroom. I mean, palace to who, right?
Yeah.
And what's happening? The widow in her hopeless poverty is paying for it. And then they look, oh, isn't it wonderful? And he says, it's all coming down. And if that's not timely, if that will not preach right now, as the powerful are building their palaces and the billionaire class and the Christian nationalism rise of let's build a grand ballroom. I mean, and if you can't be that explicit, in your context, I mean, while people are suffering, while people are paying for it,
like the irony of throwing a massive Great Gatsby party for billionaires at the same time that SNAP benefits are being cut.
Right.
I mean, like the irony of that entire last weekend is just absolutely.
So yeah, they're looking at, oh my gosh, isn't it wonderful and beautiful? And Jesus says, no, the inside is rotten.
Yeah.
And that's, go ahead.
No, I mean, so yes, absolutely. Here's the tricky thing though, is he's saying this to the disciples. And I think that's an important thing because at the end of the day, you also still have a woman who very much believes, like if you were to ask, the widow, there's a part of her, giving from her hopeless poverty where her act of giving, even to this corrupt thing, is an act of hope. And so what does it say to her to say, hey, this thing that you've just given your last, your widow's mite to is going to fall down? Because I think that there is, I think this has to be framed in two ways. One, it has to be framed in, yes, you can have this corrupt veneer, right? You talk about Gilded Age, right? It's the gilding. It's not actually gold. It's just the veneer that's on there. But also in the flip side too, it's a question of, and this is what I think this passage gets to as well, which is, when the widow's giving her gold, she's giving because she's forced to in the midst of the system, but also she's giving because she believes that this is where God dwells. This is the home of God. And to say this temple can be destroyed and God is still with us. You can be arrested and God is still with you. You can lose your family and God is still with you. You can be persecuted and God is still with you. All that you know it is God is still with you. And you got to imagine that this is a bold thing, right? Because this is in the midst or after the revolt, right? The massive diaspora, the horrifically violent suppression of the Jewish people, like all of these things that have happened where empire not only seems to have reigned because they they crucified Jesus, but also seems to have reigned because they have destroyed the temple. And remember, the temple was destroyed by Rome, and then Rome brutally and ruthlessly suppressed that great revolt in 70. And so to say that all these things does not keep God away from you, that God can be found in the presence and community and relationship that we have with one another, in the caring for the least of these, and the caring for the poor, in the reconciliation of enemies, and in the power of transformative forgiveness, and all of these things that God is present with us. And I feel like there's an important piece that, yes, there's tearing down the corruption and speaking truth in the midst of the temple. And we hold that also as saying, like, because the temple is not, God is not defined by the temple. And I think that that's in the same way too, that at times that God is not defined by the church as well. And so I think that the church seeks to reflect, we seek to be faithful, but we do not define God's actions in the world. And so I think that if that's making sense, I feel like there has to be a bit of a balancing piece there between those two, because the other piece is there's a reframing of the destruction of the temple, which in and of itself is still a deeply horrific event. Even as corrupt as it is, still horrific.
And there's incredible compassion for the woman who is supporting this, right? This isn't, because she's being duped. It's not because she's contributing to the problem. It's because she's a victim of this system. And when I think about, I don't know, I think I'm just being very influenced by the work that I did from the speech, but all, in South Carolina or North Carolina, but the work of, trying to see past our categories and our voting and our parties. And maybe I'm anachronistically treating this story. But, I see this woman, people that vote against their own interests, right?
Yeah.
Because they're convinced that this thing is real, that they're convinced that this is the path. And maybe for good reason. And maybe there was once a time, or I don't know. It's interesting, and maybe I'm making too much of that connection. But I'm also looking at, I don't go to Matthew Henry's commentary very often, fairly famous commentary, but we have a quote from there this week talking about this comes prompted from the remarks of people talking about how wonderful it was after Jesus spent so much time in conflict with the authority, right? This is after authority, conversation after conversation, battle after battle with those in authority. They're presented with this grand symbol of it, and they're wowed by it. And this is the quote from Matthew Henry's commentary. They thought their master should be as much affected with those things as they were, and should as much regret the destruction of them as they did. When we speak of the temple, it should be of the presence of God in it, and the communion with his people there have with him. It's a poor thing when we speak of the church to let our discourse dwell upon its pomps and revenues and the dignities and the powers of its officers and rulers. Mm-hmm. Right? If we're talking about the church and the ways that it's married to power, its pomp and revenue, the dignities of power of its officers, that's a problem. What it should be about is the heart of the people, the presence, and the relationships that we build. And this, I think, is the heart of this little apocalypse. That's what's revealed, right? The apocalypse means revealed. What is revealed is that the trouble that is to come is because we're not working on the relationships that matter instead of building the pomp and the dignities of the officers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think also it's a question of when faced with scary times, what do we do? Do we retreat into escapism? Do we retreat into, there's one, right? Apathetic escapism or voyeurism. right? Where we can't wait to hear what the latest outrage is because, it's just, it feeds our dopamine addictions, right? And those pieces. And so I think that there's also, what does this reveal? It reveals, yes, these things. And let's be clear. I read a great article, by now I'm trying to remember who wrote it. Matthew, I think it's Matthew Ramsey or Mark Ramsey. I think Mark Ramsey had sent it, wrote it. And basically one of the pieces of it and the gist of it was saying we have to get out of this idea, which I know I've fallen into, this idea that like everything in this moment is apocalyptic. Now, Mark Ramsey, as part of the ministry collaborative, wrote "Every day is not the last day," and talks about the danger in looking at saying this is it, that every moment is the last moment, every moment is the worst thing that's happening, every moment is apocalyptic. And one of the things that Mark Ramsey writes is he says, when you do that, if everything is immediate and we have to do something about it right now, then we sacrifice wisdom for shortcuts. And when we are in a constant level of crisis level intensity, we burn out the faithful. And we forget to plant trees because if this is the end, we can't think about the future. We can only think about this moment. And the aspect that that's not what Jesus does, right? I mean, Jesus isn't just saying, well, we got to do this right now and it's just this moment and that's it. That we have to plan for the future. We have to look forward. And he has this great piece here where he says, he talks about theological proportion and he says, not every challenge is the challenge. We learn history so we can recognize that the church has survived worse and will continue by God's grace. This recognition doesn't dilute resolve. It leavens our urgency with persistent grace. But here's the hardest part. It takes longer. Apocalyptic thinking promises quick resolution, the final battle, and the ultimate victory. It's dramatically satisfying, but Christian hope operates on God's timeline, which often feels frustratingly slow. The mustard seed doesn't become the tree overnight. He goes on. It's a great piece, and I recommend folks go over and check out the Ministry Collaborative and Every Day is Not the Day by Mark Ramsey. We'll try to put a link to it in the show notes. But I feel like it's that piece of everything that's going on. And Ramsey says it's not that we disengage, we stay engaged. But it's also not that we fall into this anxiety-driven, dopamine-driven, oh my gosh, every day is the last day, every battle is the battle, and instead are able to temper that to realize this is long-term. And I feel like that's also what Jesus is saying, which is not this is the end coming soon, but there are going to be a lot of those in everything that Jesus talks about here, Rob, right? Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other. Yeah, been there, done that. There'll be great earthquakes. Been there, we've seen that before. Great wide-scale food shortages. Yes. Epidemics. Yeah, we've even been there. We've seen that. Terrifying sights. Great signs in the sky. Yep, we've seen that. We've seen people be taken into custody, harassed, handed over, right? A lot of these things that we hear in a historical perspective are not anomalous items, but instead are too much of the historical condition. And how do we remain faithful in the midst of it?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in the show notes. So check that out. Remember, there's exegetical show notes, links to these passages, other things we've referenced. You can find all of that at pulpitfiction.com. But right now, let's turn to our Hebrew Bible reading.
Previously on the Bible.
Ruth, I smell Heaven's Bakery cooking up something good for you, sister.
And so Heaven's Bakery's got Isaiah 65, verses 17 through 25. Look, I'm creating a new heaven and a new earth. Past events won't be remembered. They won't come to mind. Be glad and rejoice forever in what I'm creating, because I'm creating Jerusalem as a joy and her people as a source of gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad about my people. No one will ever hear the sound of weeping or crying in it again. No more will babies live only a few days, or the old fail to live out their days. The one who dies at 100 will be like a young person, and the one falling short of 100 will seem cursed. They will build houses and live in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They won't build for others to live in, nor plant for others to eat. Like the days of a tree will be the days of my people. My chosen will make full use of their handiwork. They won't labor in vain, nor bear children to a world of horrors, because they will be blessed. They will be people blessed by the Lord. They, along with their descendants, before they call, I will answer. While they are speaking, I will hear. Wolf and lamb will graze together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. But the snake, its food will be dust. They won't hurt or destroy at any place on my holy mountain, says the Lord.
All right. So this is, first of all, a lot of us are going to hear this and say, "Ooh, look at this. It's like Revelation." And there's a lot of connections between this passage and Revelation 21 and 22. But I think for me, Rob, this is a great lectionary reading. It's so uplifting. It's so hopeful. And it's great that we start in verse 17. Because before a lot of what we hear in this passage is in direct response to the first 16 verses. And the first 16 verses of Isaiah 65 are about God's disappointment that says what happens, right? And so you hear, I was ready to respond to those who didn't ask. I was ready to be found by those who didn't look for me. I said, I'm here to a nation that didn't call my name. I extended my hand all day to a rebellious people, walking in a way that isn't good, following their own plans, people who provoke me to my face continually, who sacrificing in gardens and burning incense on bricks, who say, keep to yourself, keep away, right? From me, I'm too holy for you. And specifically, Rob, there's later, we hear in the passage that comes before as well, where we hear about but you who abandoned the Lord, you who forget my holy mountain, you who set a table for a God of good fortune and fill cups of mixed wine for a God of fate, I will offer you the sword. You will all bow down for slaughter. Because I called, and this is directly refuted by what you just said, Rob, because I called and you didn't answer, because I spoke and you wouldn't hear. You did what I considered evil. You chose what I didn't want. Therefore, the Lord God says, look, my servants will eat, but you will hunger. My servants will drink, but you will thirst. My servants will rejoice, but you will be ashamed. So there's just this interesting parallel between what we hear is following up on this is post-exilic, and there's a piece where God says, and what I hear in this, Rob, is God says, let's be clear, I never stopped loving you. Let's be clear, I never stopped trying to call you back to faithfulness over again and again and again and again. And the situation that you're in is the situation of which is this, the exile and the horrors of the exile was your own making. You did this no matter how badly I wanted to keep you from it. You insisted on your own way. And then it's this pivot from that, right, to 17. But look, I'm creating a new heaven and earth, and the past events won't be remembered. They won't come alive. So I think there's this fascinating change to say, God first saying, let's set the record straight, but now we're going to move into something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he spoke the truth about what has happened, but then also speaks hope into what's to come. And this is such an interesting pairing with the Luke text, right? That yes, the doom and gloom is coming. Things are falling apart. You're going to get hauled off to jail. Some of you might even die. But look, I'm creating a new heaven and a new earth. I mean, it almost feels like the part two, that there is something, that there will be a time of joy, of peace, of all of creation. Even there's a new order, even in the way, predator and prey coexist in a way that is absurd. The human life is extended to a point that, we could only dream of. And yet there's things in this clearly poetic, but also, like in so many ways also within reach. Like, you'll build houses and live in them. That's not that far. That doesn't sound impossible, right? Like, some of these things are just, you'll be able to build your own house. You'll be able to eat your own food. You're going to be able to have the fruit of your own labor, instead of being under a system where you're kept in perpetual poverty, where your homes are destroyed and occupied or taken over or bulldozed to build a wall or whatever it might be, right? These are, there's an element of this Isaiah text that feels otherworldly, but then there's also this very real, your children won't be born into a world of horrors, right? How wonderful would that be, right? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to be optimistic about the future? And that's what this is. There is a reason to be optimistic there, because God is doing something new. And that's a big part of this, right? It's not because you've figured it out or because you've earned your way back in. I'm doing something new, and you will rejoice. And this text, this feels like such an Advent text. Once again, both of these it's looking forward to something. So maybe this is pre-Advent. This is looking forward to something, and it's looking forward to next week, which is Christ the King, right? And remember that the King is the one that will establish justice on the earth, not the one that's going to rule and subjugate and enslave. So it's very much looking forward to next Sunday, and more than just next Sunday. Of course, it's looking forward to something new. And I'm thinking of Barbara Rossing obviously wrote about Revelation, and one of the things that she talked about was that this new heaven and new earth doesn't mean this one's disposable. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a recreation here using what's already, this is still Jerusalem. This is something that it's recreated, it's renewed. It's not, we can trash this place because God is just going to give us something new, which is often the reading of Revelation, especially environmentally. There's so many ecological disasters with a deep, rapture kind of reading of Revelation. And I think that's what, it's a good reminder of that here too. God is using what's existing, not just trashing it all and starting over.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, Rob. And I think too, it's also in the tense of the verb, right? This participle that says, look, I'm creating, not I will create. I am creating. Like, this is an ongoing piece. And I think that's the other one, which is, this is not in the same way that, yes, does Revelation look forward? Yes, but it also looks at the present moment, like right now, how do we do this? And it's this idea that God is saying in this moment, I am doing this. This is the ongoing work of God, is this ongoing act of creating this new heaven and earth, which is founded in justice and righteousness. And we see this piece, which is also an invitation, right? We see this invitation of people to live into this new piece. And it's not just what God is doing, right? They are invited to do what? To build houses, to live in them, to plant vineyards, to eat their fruit, and what we see here is we see acts of justice, right? They're not building for others to live in. Now, this is not a slam against contractors and home builders, right? It's a refutation of unfair labor practices, which is why we have right after that, they will not labor in vain. They will not bear children to a world of horrors, right? As you'd said, Rob. So I think this idea too of how do we participate in this new heaven and new earth? How do we participate in what Jesus calls as the kingdom of God? This, or arguably the empire of God, which is more accurate translation. As we see this, right? How do we do this? Well, maybe we start with this vision. Maybe we start by making sure that, that infant mortality is not an issue. And by infant mortality, I'm not talking about pro-life. I'm talking about after a child is born into the world, maybe we care about what happens in those first, immediately after this, right? And how do we make sure that they have enough to eat? How do we make sure that they have a roof over their head? How do we make sure that their parents are able to find employment? How are we able to make sure that we have proper parental leave? How are we able to make sure that they have proper health care? How do we make sure that they have access to proper education? How do we make sure that they have access to clean, unleaded water? And on and on and on, right? Right. That's how we have, no more will babies only live a few days. So the first thing we need to do is let's start taking care of our babies and children, or the frail to live out their days. And then let's focus on the elderly so that we don't have 80-year-olds that have to go back to work or face eviction or losing their home or going hungry, that we don't have a growing number of elderly that don't have enough food because our food assistance programs are not being fully funded and don't have access to the available healthcare that they need, right? So let's start there. Let's start about fair labor practices and stop the joke of a $15 minimum wage. Like a $15 minimum wage is absurd. We all know that it's absurd, and the federal minimum wage is $7.50. And we know it's absurd. We know it's laughably unjust. I was at a meeting earlier this week, Rob, where we were talking about this and explaining that, a $15 minimum wage in my community, right, is which is the minimum in Illinois, is $31,000 a year pre-tax, right? You still have to pay Social Security and Medicaid tax at least out of that, even if you're not hitting the income tax threshold. It means you're bringing home less than $30,000 a year. In my county, if you have one child, by the time that you have paid for the average cost of a 2-bedroom apartment of this, I should say, not even the average, the lowest cost for a 2-bedroom apartment and childcare, you will have negative $400 at the end of every month. So you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to have health care, not allowed to have transportation. I mean, this is absurd. So what does it look like in this new heaven and new earth? How do we participate in this creation that God invites us into? Well, if we don't know where else to start, let's start with the youngest among us. Let's start with the eldest among us, the most vulnerable, and let's start with fair labor practices. And let's see if we can get those things started.
Yeah. And, SNAP is on the minds of so many people. The 40, I was reading today that the largest segment of population of SNAP receivers are Walmart employees, right? Yeah. SNAP is a federal subsidy of Walmart employment, and that the fear of raising the wage that will cause inflation. Well, then maybe people wouldn't have to be on SNAP, right? Like, anyway, we're not a politics podcast, but it's hard not to see the
this is a political passage, though.
No, absolutely. I'm saying I'm not qualified to speak to the details of this kind of stuff. There's others that have, the exact numbers. I'm talking about what I heard or what I read, as opposed to citing actual things. But my point also is, yes, this is a deeply political passage. Both are, right? And that's what people miss. They think this is a promise of heaven or the prediction of the rapture, instead of actually seeing for what Jesus and for what Isaiah were talking about, their time in that moment, but also our time right now. It's not about a prediction. It's what's going on and warnings about what's going on. And I think, one of our commentators on the live show talked about, this is a really interesting point, that, apocalyptic thinking is a huge motivator for humans. Fear is a huge motivator, right? And I see that is very true in apocalyptic literature. Pops up when we're afraid, and fear can be a great motivator. But then this is about hope, right? This is actually what we're working toward. This is what we're working for. And it's a fascinating juxtaposition. It's a fascinating balance between Jesus predicting these terrible things that are happening, and Isaiah, which we use in Advent for a reason, predicting this new thing that's happening, holding them together because this is where we are, right? We live on the other side of Christ, waiting for the parousia, right? Like we're in the midst of the bad times and the joy and the hope. And it's that struggle, that paradox, that tension is where we live every day, and not catastrophizing everything. Part of what, the not catastrophizing everything is holding on to the hope and the thanksgiving and the praise of the good things that are happening in our midst.
Yeah.
And that's why these passages, usually I say, well, let's pick one or the other. I mean, this is one of those weeks where I think holding them together is incredibly valuable. Because it doesn't feel, we pick on the lectionary sometimes for picking an Old Testament piece that just sort of proof texts the New Testament. That this feels like an honest, like this is a counterbalance and the tension that is our faith every day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too that there's also one of the pieces of hope that I think is in, as you talk about the parousia, which is, and I was at a church gathering some years ago where somebody brought this up, and it's just stood out to me each time where they said, we are invited to participate in God's work. And as Reverend Dr. Thomas, had talked about, that by virtue of our baptism, we are not just invited, but we sign up. That's our way of saying we are going to participate. But there's also a piece here, Rob, that says that even if we don't do any of these things and participate, this is still happening.
Right.
God is still doing it. It may take longer, but it's still happening. And I think that that's also a piece too, which says that this is something that is happening that we are invited to participate in. What did the Isaiah's community, the Trito-Isaiah, so the post-exilic community, do to deserve to earn this new Jerusalem, this new heaven and renewed earth? They didn't do anything. It's given by grace. And so we have the opportunity to respond to that grace, or we have the opportunity not to, right? I mean, it's 10 lepers were cured. One came back and said, thank you. The others didn't get leprosy again. Like, we have the opportunity to choose. And now I would say, as Christians who have been baptized and or confirmed, right, as we have taken on those promises, we have said, nope, I have agreed to sign up and participate in this. But even if we all decided it's not going to happen, even if our churches decline in massive ways and change in massive ways, that doesn't change the fact that this new heaven and earth, that the heaven and earth, that God is still renewing them and working within it. And I think that's a part of just where our faith calls us to, which is an almost absurd faith. And yet we are fools for Christ, to steal from Paul. All right. We've got one more. We don't have much time to talk about it. But Rob, we have one more wafer to get to.
Now that's a tasty wafer.
Our wafer this week, I don't know if it's tasty, Rob. It's 2 Thessalonians. It's a little rough. Chapter 3, verses 6 through 13. You let me know if you think this is tasty or what you think. Brothers and sisters, we commend you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to stay away from every brother or sister who lives an undisciplined life that is not in line with the traditions that you received from us. You yourselves know how you need to imitate us because we were not undisciplined when we were with you. We didn't eat anyone's food without paying for it. Instead, we worked day and night with effort and hard work so that we would not impose on you. We did this to give you an example to imitate, not because we didn't have the right to insist on financial support. Even when we were with you, we were giving you this command: if anyone doesn't want to work, they shouldn't eat. We hear that some of you are living an undisciplined life. They aren't working, but they are meddling in other people's business. By the Lord Jesus Christ, we commend and encourage such people to work quietly and put their own food on the table. Brothers and sisters, don't get discouraged in doing what is right.
Okay, so it's a shame we don't have more time for this, because this is so timely. Again, when we're talking about SNAP benefits, when we're talking about people, 40 million people don't want to work. No, that's not what's happening, right? This is addressing the delayed parousia. This is Second Thessalonians, not First. This is more time has passed. It's debated whether or not this is Paul. This is probably not Paul, probably long after First Thessalonians. And there is this trouble. There is a debate over whether or not you have to engage in the world or not, or if Christ is still coming, right? There's this, there's a sort of, there's the opposite of preppers going on, right? That just think, oh, well, we don't have to really do anything because, Christ is coming again. So we don't have to worry about it. We can just sit idle and things will take care of itself. And part of what's happening here is the realization that no, we're in this for the long haul. We actually have to take care of each other. We actually have to, commit to work and to be a part of this. It's not something that we can just sit off, and eat, drink, and be merry and wait for Christ to come again and save us all and take us away. There's something more permanent here. And I think what we see in this letter is the realization of that. And, so it's one of those things that is both very timely, connected to what we're talking about now, and also very different, right? We're in a country, in a place that is got incredible wealth and incredible abundance, and we're just not sharing it, as opposed to a time when people are under persecution and struggling to get by, and some are choosing not to participate. That's a very different economy that we're talking about and dealing with.
Yeah, I like what Beverly Gaventa, Dr. Gaventa says about this in both the text for preaching, but also in her interpretation study too, which points out too that this has been used so abusively and so wrong, right? Because the translation isn't also very good. What the Greek actually says here is it doesn't say those who aren't working, but rather those, and she goes, it's really not those who are not working, but those who are working around. Gaventa says it's those who they don't do their own work, but they busy themselves with the work of other people. That this is not about, supposed laziness or people not doing work. Instead, it's about judgment and gossip. It's about, instead of building up the community, instead of doing the work that builds up to the community, they're doing the work of determining, for example, instead of actually building and helping out the community and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, they're talking about work requirements. What do you need to do to eat? Because what I'm doing to eat, Rob, the work that I'm doing is deciding what will make you worthy enough to eat, right? Whether you're doing enough. That's really what this is getting out of it. This is not pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that sort of idea. It's actually it's about the people who are saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's actually a condemnation for the very people who use this passage to add work requirements to people who are barely making ends meet. And so I think that the irony of this is not only has it been used in disruptive ways, but that's not even actually what this passage is saying at all. And it's been used in twisted ways. It's been used in this broken idea of the Protestant work ethic and abusive idea that we hear more and more that's happening. And so again, I think that also going back and saying that's not even what the text actually says in this passage. And it's also inconsistent with everything else we know about the early church, right? So imagine if they were maybe we should form deacons in the book of Acts so that they can help feed the widows. And instead of actually doing that and having Stephen and others be deacons, they were like, no, the widows aren't working hard enough, so they don't get to eat. Right. Remember the feeding of the 5,000 when Jesus said, sorry, only those of you who have worked. And, you guys have just been sitting here listening to me, you lazy bums. If you haven't worked for it, you don't get it. I mean, it's just that interpretation is contrary to Scripture.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. And I mean, people in this country really hate poor people. That's what it comes down to. I mean, they just think negatively of them. And that is, so they hear this and they just think, oh, see, so does Paul. And, you use that phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That phrase in itself, look up what it actually, think about it, and then think about how absurd it is. Your bootstraps are connected to your shoes. The phrase was actually originally intended to mock the very concept, because it is impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can put your boot on by your bootstrap, but to lift yourself up by pulling on your shoes is ridiculous. And somehow that idea has been turned into a rallying cry. But the whole point of that phrase was to show how absurd the idea is in the first place. The other thing I want to mention here too is the beginning part reminds me of Psalm 1. All right, we command you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to stay away from every brother or sister who lives an undisciplined life that is not in line with the traditions you received from us. The truly happy person does not sit with scoffers or the disrespectful or sinners, and that is, but instead delights in the law of the Lord, delights in God's instruction, delights in the story of God redeeming God's people, right? If you want to be truly happy, you delight in the story of God's love, not sit with the scoffers and the disrespectful and those who would check people's cards or, check their papers or make sure their prerequisites are all in line in order to get their food or to get, to be in the kingdom. You have to, right? This is, to me, this passage reminds me a lot of Psalm 1. Because it's that to be truly happy, to be satisfied, to be, have a piece of God is to delight in what's good, not to go around looking at and finding other people's flaws.
Well, and I think too, it's and I think that also connects with this, as well. And I think it connects to the Isaiah passage as well, with this idea of, it's easier to sit back and point out all the holes and not actually do anything to help join in the creating of a new heaven and renewing the heaven and the earth. Right? It's easy to sit back and scoff. It's easy to sit back and point fingers and do those things and to be negative and to tear down. That's the easy part. The building up, which is what the Isaiah passage was saying, is the difficult part. The building up of the kingdom of God in this community that we hear in the Thessalonians passage is the same thing. So how do what do we do with that piece? And so I think that's the other piece of, as we're looking deeper into this, which is, it's not, the idea of getting rid of the scoffers and things like that is also, what are we doing to participate in the kingdom of God? I think too, by the way, Rob, is that the lectionary, I know this is shocking, does a great disservice by ending in verse 13. Verse 13, by the way, I think is great. And I think it actually connects really strongly back with, Luke. Brothers and sisters, don't get discouraged by doing what is right. So I love this. Take note of anyone who doesn't obey what we have said in this letter. Don't associate with them so that they will be ashamed of themselves. Don't treat them like enemies, but warn them like you would do for a brother or sister. So what do we do with the scoffers, Rob? Right? What do we do with the people that we disagree with? What do we do with these people that are not pulling their weight? We love them. That's what we do to them.
Treat them like a brother or sister. Yeah.
That's what we're called to do, because that's the right piece to do. And the worst case is that if there are things that are between us, what do? We don't associate, or as someone once said somewhere, you knock the boots off your sandals and you keep going. You don't fall into ad hominem attacks. You don't beat them into submission. That's not what we're called to do. We don't err into doing right. So I feel like that reading the rest of this passage is critical as well. Mm-hmm. Friends, there is quite a bit more on this passage in the show notes at pulpitfiction.com. We want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Pulpit Fiction Podcast, especially if you're joining us for the first time here or live. We've had some folks joining us live. I want to, Lee Saylor, one of our voices in the wilderness, has been with us on Facebook along with Stacy Tate, which has been great. And shout out to Scott Coates as well, who joined us on the live stream on YouTube. You can always join us on Wednesdays at 1:30 Central Time and here in the United States for our live shows. They are posted on Facebook and on YouTube. You can also go over to our website, pulpitfiction.com, where you can find all of our exegetical notes as well as links to our many resources that we talked about. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Pulpit Fiction. You can find us on X at Pulpit F Podcast. We are wherever you find different podcasts and listen to those different podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and all those different places. So if you have any trouble finding us, just let us know. Wherever you're listening to us, leave us a review. That helps the show. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, email us, show@pulpitfiction.us. And we can only keep this going with your amazing support. We're so grateful for our unbelievable supporters. You can join that Pulpit Fiction community by going to pulpitfiction.com/support.
I want to say, if you have a conference like Pastor Shannon Mullen had, we're willing to come and speak as well. I think we can come to you if you'd like. I know we're both working preachers, but reach out to us for those kinds of things. And remember, YouTube, if you go to youtube.com/Pulpit Fiction, you go to our YouTube page, and there, like and subscribe to the page, and then you'll get those notifications when we release on YouTube. Thank you to Scott Fletcher for the voice bumpers, Nikolai Heidelis for the transition music, and Brian O'Dean for our closing song. Please have a blessed week.
Hate to say it's time to go, but it happens every time, you know. So now you're free to go about your day. We've heard the word in voice and song. We've wondered and we've laughed along. So go and preach the good news on your way. This is the Pulpit Fiction Podcast for preachers and seekers and Bible geeks. This is the Pulpit Fiction Podcast. We'll see you back next week.